I didn't need a therapist to explain why I grew up quiet. A childhood spent in the Carter household made silence feel safer than speaking. Our house in Spokane looked normal from the outside: blue shutters, trimmed lawn, the kind of place neighbors assume holds a functioning, wholesome family. Inside, it was a different climate entirely. My parents didn't yell, didn't throw things, didn't hit. They just believed comparison was the only language worth speaking. And in every comparison, my sister Madison won. She was the smart one, the leader, the girl with potential. I was steady, polite, nice. All those words sound harmless until you're the kid who realizes nice is just the placeholder adults use when they can't think of anything actually impressive to say about you. Madison was 3 years older and mastered the art of subtle cruelty before I hit middle school. She didn't scream insults or shove me. She did it like a professional, soft tone, perfect timing, always with an audience. She'd lean in with that sweet smile she used on teachers and say, "Nat's doing her best," which sounded supportive until you thought about what it meant. My best was never enough to count. Hers always was. At 17, I knew my role, the background character in my own family story. My parents didn't mean harm. They just genuinely believed Madison was destined for greatness and that I was destined for something smaller. They didn't have to say it directly. It was in the way their faces lit up when she entered a room, and the way they nodded automatically whenever she said something judgmental, as if her opinion came stamped with official approval. The worst part? For a long time, I believed them. The night everything clicked, the night the balance finally tipped, was a birthday dinner for my dad. Everyone was crowded around the dining table, the air thick with the smell of roasted chicken and the tension that always came with these gatherings. I never knew why my chest tightened at family meals. Back then, I didn't have the words for emotional hierarchy. My mom asked casually, "Nat, have you thought more about what you want to do after graduation?" Before I could answer, Madison lifted her glass like she was making a toast. "She's still figuring it out," she said. "College isn't really her thing." A couple cousins laughed under their breath. My uncle coughed to hide a smile. My parents didn't correct her. They never did. I felt something sharp move across my chest. Not quite pain, more like a realization. A clean line being drawn. "I didn't say that," I replied quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. Madison shrugged. "Well, Nat, you're not exactly Miss Ambition. You don't need to pretend. It's fine to take a different path." She said it like she was offering compassion, like her words were a kindness. But every syllable was a brick, reinforcing the wall she'd spent our whole lives building between us. The part that struck deepest wasn't that she mocked me. It was how comfortable she was doing it in front of the whole family, like she knew nothing bad would happen if she did. And she was right. No one said a thing. I remember pushing peas around my plate, cheeks burning, hearing the low hum of conversation continue, as if I weren't sitting there trying to swallow a version of myself I didn't want anymore. After dinner, needing air, I slipped out to the driveway. The sky was that kind of early winter gray that makes everything feel colder than it is. Madison's car was parked by the curb, brand new, shiny, a gift from our parents for her high school graduation. She had a future worth investing in. I apparently did not. Across the street, taped to the community board near the mailbox, was a poster. "Navi, build a future you can't get anywhere else." A woman in uniform stood with her hands behind her back, staring straight into the camera with a confidence I couldn't imagine feeling. The poster fluttered in the wind, and for a second it didn't look like an advertisement. It looked like a doorway. Something inside me shifted, subtle, quiet, but real. A pressure valve releasing after years of being wound too tight. Maybe the Navy wouldn't compare me to Madison. Maybe they'd see who I was, without measuring me against someone else's potential. Maybe I could be more than nice. The sliding door behind me opened. Madison leaned out, arms folded, coat draped over her shoulders like a queen surveying her land. "Mom said come inside. You're being dramatic." I turned around slowly. She didn't notice the poster behind me. She never saw anything that wasn't about her. "I'm not being dramatic," I said, and I felt it. My voice was different, stronger, or maybe just steadier. She raised an eyebrow. "Sure. Whatever helps you sleep." She disappeared back inside, the doors shutting with a soft finality. I stayed in the driveway a little longer, looking at the poster, at the woman who seemed to stand taller than any version of myself I'd ever imagined. For the first time in my life, someone wasn't telling me who I was supposed to be. For the first time, I could picture a future that didn't include being anyone's shadow. And for reasons I couldn't explain yet, that small moment in the cold air felt like the beginning of everything that would come next. If you're watching and you've ever grown up in a family where someone's voice always overshadowed yours, drop a comment. And if you want more military and family revenge stories like this one, subscribe so you don't miss the next part of the journey. Stepping onto the bus for boot camp felt like inhaling a new kind of air, sharper, colder, but cleaner than anything I'd breathed in the Carter household. The engine vibrated beneath my feet, and something in me vibrated with it, as if my bones already sensed the shift happening. There wasn't time to look back. Nobody was standing behind me anyway. The first days hit like a wave I wasn't prepared for. No one is. Not really. The shouting, the schedules, the pressure to move before you think, to react before you question, it all came at me fast. But unlike home, where I always felt like every mistake proved Madison right, here mistakes were expected, corrected, forgiven. Boot camp wasn't gentle, but it was fair, and that fairness felt like oxygen. I learned quickly that my quiet wasn't a weakness here. It helped me listen. It helped me absorb. While others snapped back or froze up, I just kept moving, kept doing, kept adjusting. There was relief in following a structure that didn't leave room for anyone's opinion of who I was supposed to be. Drill instructors didn't care about Madison, or Spokane, or who the favorite child was. They cared if you showed up. If you tried. If you pushed. I pushed. By week 4, I'd fallen into a rhythm I didn't know I was capable of. Folding uniforms with sharp corners, hitting times on the obstacle course, keeping my bunk inspection ready. For the first time, I realized I wasn't being compared to anyone except the version of myself from the day before. It was addictive. When I graduated boot camp, no one from home came to watch. I didn't expect them to. I stood in formation anyway, chest tight with pride as the band played. The sun bounced off rows of fresh uniforms, catching the edges of our insignias like sparks. I wasn't just existing anymore. I was becoming. A school in Pensacola came next, my introduction to the world of wires, circuits, schematics, and troubleshooting. Aviation electrician's mate sounded simple when the recruiter explained it, but standing inside a hangar with a half-disassembled aircraft in front of me made it clear the job wasn't easy at all. It demanded patience, accuracy, and a kind of confidence I was still learning to build. The instructors didn't care about my past. They cared about whether I could read a schematic without frying a circuit board. I studied until my eyes burned. I asked questions even when I felt stupid. Slowly, the chaos of wires began to make sense in my hands. When we powered up a system I'd repaired for the first time, and saw every light come on clean, I felt something I had never felt as a Carter. Certainty. My parents called rarely. Madison, even less. When she did, it was usually a text that felt like a drive-by insult. "How's Navy life?" "Still doing whatever it is you do?" I stopped trying to explain the complexity of my job. If she wasn't going to understand, I wouldn't waste breath trying. Deployment came faster than I expected. Japan first, then Guam. Long hours under fluorescent lights, jet fuel thick in the air, tools clinking beside my boots. Nights spent under the roar of P8 engines being tested. Mornings filled with maintenance briefs. We worked until our fingers cramped. We laughed through exhaustion. We held each other upright when sleep felt like a distant rumor. It was intense, consuming, but I belonged in a way I never had before. My chief pulled me aside after a 14-hour shift one evening. "Carter, you've got good instincts. Keep this up, and you'll move faster than you think." No one in my family had ever said anything close to that. Encouragement like that could have brought me to tears if I hadn't been covered in grease and sweat. I kept going. I kept learning. And I kept earning trust from people whose opinions actually mattered. By year 3, I was promoted to E5 ahead of schedule. I didn't tell Madison. I didn't tell my parents. The achievement felt too personal, too sacred to hand over to a family who treated my accomplishments like trivia. Then came the day that changed the shape of my service entirely, my chief calling me into his office with a tone that made the hairs on my neck lift. "You're being recommended for a Navy Achievement Medal," he said, sliding the paperwork across the desk. I stared at it. For what? For catching a wiring fault on a systems check that could have grounded the entire deployment rotation, he said. "You saw what no one else did. That matters." I felt heat rise behind my eyes, but I blinked hard and kept my spine straight. "Thank you, Chief." The ceremony was small, held right there on the pier with the aircraft towering behind us. The medal felt heavier than it looked when he pinned it to my uniform. My division clapped. A few joked about me becoming an officer one day. I smiled, but there was something deeper happening in my chest, a quiet realization that I'd built something real. If Madison had been there, she would have had nothing to say. For once in our lives, silence might have been on my side. But she wasn't there. No one from my family was. And somehow, that made it clearer. My life was no longer running parallel to theirs. It was diverging one decision, one rank, one deployment at a time. I walked back toward the hangar after the ceremony, metal still warm against my chest, feeling the weight of everything I'd earned without a single person at home asking how I'd done it. It didn't hurt the way it used to. It felt like proof that I no longer needed their permission to become someone worth noticing. The cold from that driveway was still clinging to my skin when I pushed the back door open and stepped into the kitchen. The warmth inside didn't make anything feel warmer. My parents were loading plates into the dishwasher, and Madison was scrolling through her phone like the night hadn't carved something sharp into me. She didn't look up. She never needed to. I walked past her without a word, and went straight to my room. The poster outside kept replaying in my head the woman with the steady shoulders and the face of someone who belonged somewhere. It wasn't a fantasy. It felt like a door I hadn't known was allowed to open for someone like me. I closed my bedroom door, sat at my desk, and pulled the small recruiting flyer from under a stack of notebooks. I'd picked it up months earlier at school, but hadn't taken it seriously. I unfolded it slowly, running my finger over the sharp print. "Become more than you ever believed you could." The house was quiet, except for the clink of dishes in the kitchen. For a moment, I just listened to the sound of my family moving through routines I no longer wanted to fit into. The decision formed itself without fireworks, without grand speeches, just a quiet click in my chest, like something falling into the place it had belonged all along. I dialed the recruiter's number. A man answered with a crisp, practiced voice. "Petty Officer Jacobs speaking." It startled me how confident he sounded, how effortlessly his voice filled the space mine always struggled to claim. "Hi," I said. I'm interested in learning more about the Navy." He didn't hesitate. "Great. Come by the office tomorrow. We'll talk options." I agreed before I could overthink it. When I hung up, I felt a pulse of something electric under my skin, fear or excitement, or both. The next morning, I left the house early. Madison was still asleep, curled in her bed like royalty. My parents barely glanced up when I said I was going out. I didn't expect them to. They hadn't noticed anything important about me in years. The recruiter's office was small but neat, with Navy posters lined along the walls. Petty Officer Jacobs greeted me with a firm handshake and a calm, encouraging smile. He walked me through the basics, jobs, training, benefits, expectations. Unlike my family, he didn't act like I was reaching too high. He didn't act like I was nice but plain. He talked to me as if I were capable, as if I could become someone. When he asked, "What do you want from your future, Natalie?" I realized it was the first time an adult had asked me that without already assuming the answer. "I want to matter," I said, before I could filter it. He nodded like that made perfect sense. By the time I left the office, papers in hand, my head was buzzing, not with doubt, but with possibility. I wasn't signing anything yet. I still had steps to take, tests to pass, approvals to make, but I had a direction, something that was finally mine. Back at home, Madison was in the kitchen, spooning yogurt into her bowl like she hadn't shredded me the night before. She glanced up lazily. "Where'd you go?" she asked. "Recruiter's office," I said, placing the papers on the table. The spoon froze midair. "Why, you're kidding, right?" My mom entered the room just in time to hear that. Recruiter? What do you need a recruiter for? I'm thinking about joining the Navy, I said, careful to keep my voice even. Madison let out a laugh so sharp it felt like glass hitting the floor. Nat, come on. The Navy? You? You cried when you had to get your wisdom teeth pulled. Boot camp would eat you alive. Mom didn't laugh, but she didn't tell Madison to stop either. She just pressed her lips together in that worried, disappointed way she used whenever she thought I was making a mistake. Dad walked in next, holding his coffee mug. The military is serious business, Nat. Maybe think about community college first. Something more practical. Madison leaned her elbows on the counter, smirking like she had front-row tickets to my humiliation. This is adorable, she said. Nat wants to go be GI. Jane. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but the feeling inside me wasn't embarrassment this time. It was clarity. Every time Madison opened her mouth, she pushed me further toward the decision I'd already made. I'm going, I said simply. Madison blinked like she wasn't used to me being firm. You'll last a week. Maybe, I said. Maybe I'll last longer than you think. Her smile faltered, just a fraction. That night, I filled out the first batch of paperwork. I studied the ASVAB prep book the recruiter gave me. I sat on my bed with a sense of steady calm I hadn't felt in years. It didn't matter that my family didn't believe in me. I was starting to believe in myself. When the time finally came to swear in, nobody from my family came to the ceremony. Not my parents. Not Madison. But standing there with my right hand raised, repeating words that tied me to something bigger than the Carter household, I felt lighter than I'd ever felt. Being overlooked had taught me how to move silently. But the Navy taught me how to stand tall. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I felt that first shift, the beginning of a future where Madison would no longer be the voice that defined me. The hum of the hangar was still in my ears when my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in months. Madison never called unless she wanted an audience, so the screen lighting up with Madison Carter made something inside me stiffen. I let it ring twice before answering, wiping grease off my hands as I stepped outside into the salty Washington air. Her voice cracked before she even finished the first sentence. Nat. Something happened. It wasn't the tone she usually used with me, the smug, polished confidence that had always made me feel smaller. This voice was ragged, stripped raw. A part of me tightened, instinctively bracing. Madison wasn't someone who showed weakness. Not unless she had no choice. My job, she said. They let me go. I leaned against the rail outside the hangar, listening without filling the silence. She kept talking, like she didn't know how to stop. The company had downsized. Her position was eliminated, but she said the word like it was a personal offense. They cut the whole team, she continued. 4 years. And they didn't even give us proper notice. I could hear her pacing heels clicking on hardwood, the faint hitch in her breath that meant she was close to crying. Madison hated crying. She'd once told me, crying gives people too much power. But now she couldn't stop. They said it wasn't about performance, she said, but her voice wavered on the edge of that statement, like she didn't fully believe it. And Eric, he broke up with me last night. Eric, the boyfriend who, last Christmas, had joked that I probably salute my toaster, the same man Madison swore she'd marry one day. He said he couldn't keep paying for everything, she went on, words tumbling out in a rush. Rent's going up, my car payment's late. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. The Madison I knew would never admit this to me. She'd rather swallow a brick than let me hear vulnerability. But here she was, voice shaking, pride crumbling, foundation cracking open like thin ice. For a moment, I didn't say anything. The wind from the airfield whipped at my sleeves, carrying the distant whir of turbines. Her breathing filled the space between us, too fast, too shallow. Finally, she whispered, I feel like everything is falling apart. The truth sat heavy on my tongue. Her perfect life, the pedestal she'd used to look down at me, was collapsing faster than she could pretend. But I didn't say anything cruel. I just listened until she ran out of words. I'm sorry, I said gently. I know, she replied, and it hit me that she wasn't apologizing for calling or for anything she'd ever done. She was apologizing for her life, not looking the way she'd promised everyone it would. After we hung up, I stared out at the line of aircraft on the tarmac, sunlight hitting their metal skin like polished steel. My life wasn't perfect, but it was stable, earned, built from sweat and discipline, and long nights with tools in my hands. Madison's life had been built on an illusion of being untouchable. Once the illusion cracked, everything underneath started to crumble. Over the next few weeks, Madison's calls came more frequently, not the old calls filled with bragging or backhanded comments. These were quieter, shorter, punctured with humiliation she tried to hide. She kept saying things like, "I thought I'd have a promotion by now. I thought I'd be in a better place. I thought life would, I don't know, make more sense." She never asked about the Navy. Not once. It was easier for her to pretend my world didn't exist than to face the possibility I'd found something she couldn't. One night, she admitted her credit cards were maxed out. She'd skipped her last 2 rent payments. She was applying everywhere, coffee shops, retail, anything, but nothing stuck. "It's like no one wants me," she said softly. I remembered all the times she'd said that I had no future, that the Navy was the easy way out. Listening to her now, I felt something more complicated than satisfaction. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't triumph. It was the strange, heavy ache of realizing the person who spent her whole life trying to be above everyone else now didn't know how to survive at ground level. My parents called me that weekend, not to check on me, not to ask about deployments or promotions or medals. They wanted to talk about Madison. "She's struggling," my mom said. "We're worried. Maybe you can talk to her?" "I have," I said. My father sighed, weighed down by worry. "She just needs some support right now." Support. A word they'd never used in my direction. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. Mom hesitated. "Maybe, guide her. Help her find a direction." The irony wasn't lost on me. They had dismissed the direction I chose. But now, when Madison's life was collapsing, the daughter they'd underestimated for years suddenly became useful. I didn't argue. There was no point. 2 days later, Madison called with a spark of false hope in her voice. "I heard the Navy base sometimes hires civilians," she said. "Good pay. Good benefits. I'm thinking, maybe I should try." I didn't respond at first. She kept talking. "I mean, you work there. You know people. Maybe you could, I don't know, help me get in?" The old arrogance slipped into her tone, like she couldn't help reverting to who she used to be. She had no idea how the world she mocked was about to collide headfirst with the world she was desperate to join. The way her voice shifted from desperation to expectation happened so smoothly, it almost sounded rehearsed. I was sitting in my car outside the chow hall, engine off, uniform jacket draped over the passenger seat, listening to Madison as she said it again, this time slower, like the words tasted better the second time around. "You work on base," she repeated. "So you can help me get a job there." Her tone wasn't a plea. It was a declaration, something between entitlement and assumption, the same tone she used growing up when she wanted my dessert, my seat, my plans. I pressed my thumb against the steering wheel, grounding myself. "It doesn't work like that," I said. "Federal hiring isn't something I can." "Oh my God, Nat," she cut in, like I was being dramatic. "I'm not asking you to break rules, just put in a good word." "You can't just put in a good word," I reminded her. "Every civilian job goes through USA jobs. Background checks, clearances, vetting. I don't get to pull people through the door." She exhaled loudly, the noise flaring through the speakers like she'd been inconvenienced by reality. "Well, can you at least help me figure out which job I should apply for? They have like 15 postings. Admin assistant, housing clerk, some HR thing. It's confusing." "There are links explaining them," I said carefully. "And qualifications. Yeah, which is why I need you." She paused, softening her voice into something falsely sweet. "Come on, Nat. Don't be difficult." The words landed exactly where she intended them to, right in that childhood bruise she always pressed when she wanted something. But the reflex she expected didn't show up this time. I didn't fold. I didn't apologize. I just said, "Send me the postings you're interested in. I'll explain what they mean." She hesitated, maybe thrown off by the calm firmness in my voice. "Okay, fine." When the links came through, I scrolled through them carefully. A few were clearly beyond her qualifications. A couple were entry-level, but competitive. One, a GS5 administrative assistant, was the most realistic. I explained the process as simply as I could. How the hiring system worked, what the timeline usually was, how she needed to submit every detail perfectly, or her application wouldn't even be considered. She didn't thank me. Instead, she said, "So basically, you can't guarantee anything." "That's right," I said. A long pause stretched between us. "Wow," she muttered. "You really don't like helping, do you?" The comment felt like a hand closing around my throat, not because it hurt, but because it was so predictable, so familiar. The same script she'd used our entire lives. If I didn't give her exactly what she wanted, then I was selfish, difficult, or ungrateful. But I didn't let it stick this time. I finished the call by saying, "I hope it works out. That's all I can say." The next morning, I watched her name appear in a text, "Heading to Whitby tomorrow. Might as well show up in person." I stared at the message for a long moment, then slipped the phone into my pocket and headed toward the hangar. The idea of Madison walking into the place where I earned every inch of respect I had made something uneasy twist inside me. Not fear, something closer to dread. By noon the following day, she was already at the main gate. I saw her from a distance as I crossed the flight-line sunglasses, hair perfect despite the wind, dressed like she'd walked out of a downtown Seattle office. She looked out of place against the backdrop of security checkpoints, armed sentries, rows of aircraft, and the constant thunder of engines. Her eyes scanned everything with a mix of fascination and discomfort, like she couldn't quite understand the world she'd spent years belittling. I approached the gate, just as security checked her ID. "Morning, Petty Officer Carter," the gate guard called out, giving me a nod as he handed back my CAC. Madison's head snapped toward me so fast it was almost comical. She blinked at the guard, then at me, then back at the guard. "Petty officer?" she repeated, confusion threading through her voice. The guard just smiled and waved me through. Madison followed behind me, heels clacking aggressively on the pavement. "What was that?" "What was what?" "He called you Petty Officer Carter?" "That's my rank," I said as neutrally as possible. "Since when?" she demanded. "For a while." Her jaw tightened. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time, except she wasn't sure if she liked the view. Inside the base, the sounds hit her in layers. Turbines spinning up, forklifts reversing, radios crackling with coded instructions. Sailors jogged past in uniform, saluting, greeting each other, moving with purpose. None of it was glamorous, but it all meant something. Every few steps, someone greeted me. "Carter. Morning AE2. You good for the systems brief later?" Madison's eyes darted between them, then back to me, like she'd stumbled into a world she didn't have the map for. She didn't say a word when we entered the hangar, and she saw me step toward my workspace. The aircraft loomed overhead, massive, humming faintly with residual warmth from earlier tests. My division was gathered around a console, and our lead turned as I approached. "Carter, perfect timing." He noticed Madison, nodded politely, and went right back to discussing system checks. There was a moment, quick, subtle, where I saw it land in her. This wasn't a hobby, it wasn't a phase. It wasn't something she could reduce to a joke. This was a career, a respected one that required skill she never bothered to imagine I could possess. And more than that, it was mine. Built without her. Existing beyond her reach. She stood there stiffly, arms crossed, staring at me like she was recalibrating the narrative she'd held onto for years. The wind from outside blew through the hangar doors, carrying the sharp scent of jet fuel and metal. Madison's hair whipped across her cheek, and she pushed it back with a frustrated huff, heels wobbling on the grating. For once, she didn't have a single rehearsed line ready. The truth was louder than anything she could have said. Madison's silence trailed behind us like a shadow as we walked deeper into the hangar. She kept adjusting her purse strap, like she didn't know what to do with her hands, a rare crack in her polished, controlled exterior. The air vibrated with engine noise, metal tools clanking, and the distant throb of turbines from a P-8 taxiing toward the runway. Every sound belonged here. She didn't. I grabbed my logbook, flipped to the maintenance entries for the week, and took a moment to breathe. It grounded me. This space, these people, this work, it all moved with purpose, and that purpose didn't bend around her presence the way our childhood home always had. When I looked up, Madison was staring at the aircraft like she couldn't decipher what she was looking at. Her eyes traced the fuselage, the open panels revealing bundles of wires and hydraulic lines. "This is a lot," she said finally. "It is," I replied. She didn't ask what I did here. She didn't ask what my responsibilities were. She didn't ask how I'd gone from the quiet girl she once dismissed to someone entrusted with systems on a multi-million-dollar aircraft. She just rubbed her arms, visibly uncomfortable. Before I could say anything else, Chief Morgan called out from the far side of the hangar. "Carter, briefing room, 10 minutes. "Got it," I answered. Chief gave a quick nod and moved on. It was nothing unusual, just the rhythm of our day, but the way Madison stared at him made me realize she wasn't used to seeing authority figures talk to me like I mattered. "What's that about?" she asked. "It's my division brief." She blinked. "You lead briefs?" "Sometimes." Another recalibration flickered across her face. She tried to hide it, but the edges slipped. I motioned toward the door. "Come on, you'll need to sign in at admin anyway." We walked across the yard toward the administrative building. Sailors passed by with toolboxes, paperwork, radios. Each person acknowledged me with a nod or a greeting. Some stopped to ask about the aircraft or confirm a schedule. Not one person acknowledged Madison. The imbalance was new for her. I could feel it radiating off her confusion, mixed with a kind of bruised pride she was trying to swallow down. She finally broke the silence. "So, how many people here know you?" "Most of them. And they all just talk to you like that?" "Like what?" "Like you're in charge of something." I pushed open the door to admin. "I am in charge of something." Inside, the admin desk clerk looked up immediately. "Hey Carter, you signing somebody in?" "Yeah," I said. "My sister, Madison Carter." The clerk smiled politely. "Welcome to Whidbey. Here to drop off paperwork?" Madison's voice wobbled between pride and embarrassment. "I'm interviewing." "Great," the clerk said, handing her a form. "Fill this out, and someone will escort you." As Madison took the clipboard, the clerk looked back at me. "Systems brief still in 10? Yep, see you there." I left Madison filling out forms and walked down the hallway to the briefing room. The moment I stepped inside, the energy shifted back to the place where everything flowed naturally, clipboards being passed around, chairs scraped against the floor, sailors settling into their seats. Our lead glanced at me. "Carter, go over the electrical discrepancies?" I stepped forward and laid out the issues we'd found on the P-8's port systems, outlining the corrective actions, timelines, and safety procedures. My voice was steady, the same tone I'd grown into over years of work, calm, clear, confident. Not once did I think of Madison in that moment. My focus lived entirely in this room, on this job, with people who trusted me. While the briefing wrapped up, a soft knock tapped on the open door. Madison stood there, escorted by a civilian HR rep who gave me a polite nod. "Carter," he said. "I'll take her over to the admin wing." "Thank you," I said. Madison's gaze darted around the room at the uniforms, the charts, the attention I'd been holding just moments ago. When our eyes met, something raw flashed across her expression. The last time she'd looked at me that closely, we were teenagers, and she was deciding how to phrase the next sentence that would make me feel small. But this time she seemed to be doing math she couldn't solve. The HR rep guided her down the hall, and I followed a few steps behind until we reached the lobby. She turned to me abruptly. "You never told me it was like this." I studied her for a moment. "Like what?" "This," she said, motioning to everything around her. "All of this. People listen to you. They respect you." "I worked for that," I said simply. She swallowed, throat tight. "I didn't know." "You didn't ask." Her mouth opened, but no sound came. The silence between us wasn't familiar this time. It wasn't the old kind, the kind where I shrank, and she filled the space. This silence was hers, not mine. The HR rep returned, clipboard in hand. "Miss Carter, ready?" She straightened her blazer, nodded, and followed him past the security desk. I watched her walk away, steps a little too stiff, shoulders held a little too high, as if she were trying to hold herself together in an environment that wouldn't bend to her. Through the glass, I saw her pause outside. She looked left, then right, at the command buildings, the sailors moving with purpose, the way everything here functioned on structure, discipline, and earned authority. For years, she had built her identity on being above me. Now she was standing in the middle of a world where I had built something she couldn't ignore, and the weight of that truth settled over her shoulders heavier than any rank I'd ever worn. Madison's heels clicked too loudly on the linoleum as she followed the HR rep down the hallway, the sound sharp and restless, like she was trying to convince herself she belonged there. I stayed back, giving her space. This was her interview, her moment to prove she could stand on her own 2 feet without leaning on the pedestal our family had always placed her on. But even from a distance, I could see the nerves rolling off her in waves. The admin wing was quieter than the rest of the building, humming with printers, low conversations, and the tapping of keyboards. When Madison stepped inside the interview room, the change in her posture was immediate. Chin higher, shoulders squared, smile practiced. I knew that version of her, the polished performance she used whenever she needed to impress someone. I didn't sit in the room with her, but the walls in that building didn't do much to muffle sound. I lingered near the vending machines, taking a sip from my water bottle, listening without meaning to. At first, her voice carried the bright, confident tone she always used when she felt a spotlight on her. Yes, I handled all scheduling for my last team. I'm very detail-oriented. I'm used to fast-paced environments, standard lines. Nothing inherently wrong. But the edges were too smooth, too rehearsed. The panel asked questions, real ones, about federal processes, documentation accuracy, and handling confidential information. I heard her answers dip into vagueness. She talked around concepts she clearly didn't understand. She redirected questions back toward her own frustrations rather than her experience. Then came the moment everything shifted. One interviewer, a reservist in khakis, asked her a straightforward question about working with military personnel. Something in the phrasing must have triggered her because she let out a short, dismissive laugh. Well, I'm sure working with a bunch of kids in uniforms won't be too hard. The silence that followed was heavy enough to feel through the wall. Kids in uniforms, she'd said it out loud, in a Navy building. During a Navy civilian interview, to a Navy officer. My stomach tightened. The reservist spoke, voice steady. Just to clarify, do you mean service members? Madison paused, the way she always did when she realized she'd miscalculated. Oh, I didn't mean it like that. I just meant it's different from the corporate world. Another interviewer spoke gently but firmly. Are you comfortable in a chain of command environment? Her voice sharpened. Comfortable? Yes. But I prefer workplaces where people can think for themselves. I rubbed a hand across my mouth, exhaling slowly through my nose. The panel wasn't going to argue with her, but they didn't need to. She'd said enough. More than enough. A few minutes later, the door opened. Madison stepped out, her smile too tight, eyes shining with that stubborn unwillingness to acknowledge failure. The HR rep thanked her politely, the same way they thank everyone who won't be moving forward. As she walked toward me, her expression shifted from forced confidence to simmering irritation. They barely asked me anything relevant, she said. Half the questions were ridiculous. That's how federal interviews go, I replied. They didn't give me a chance to actually show what I can do. They did, I said softly. You just didn't like the questions. She shot me a glare. You think you know everything because you wear a uniform now? I didn't rise to it. The anger she felt wasn't about me. It was about the mirror she'd been forced to look into. We walked outside together. The wind off the water swept across the pavement, carrying the noise of engines in the distance. Madison hugged her blazer tighter around her, though the air wasn't cold enough to warrant it. I don't understand, she muttered. I'm qualified. I have experience. I've held real jobs. You do have experience, I said. But base jobs have structure, clear hierarchy, direct communication. It's different. So you're saying I can't handle structure? I'm saying the interview was about fit. Her jaw tensed. They didn't see what I bring to the table. They saw what you said in the room. What's that supposed to mean? I met her eyes. Calling service members kids in uniforms wasn't a great choice. She spun toward me, outrage flaring. Someone exaggerated that. I didn't mean it literally. But you said it. That's insane, she snapped. People are so sensitive. I can't say anything without someone twisting it. It wasn't twisted, I said quietly. Her breath hitched, frustration and humiliation colliding under her skin. You're taking their side. I'm not taking sides. Yes, you are. You're always trying to prove you're better than me now, like the Navy suddenly made you some perfect little hero. No, I said. The Navy didn't make me better than you, but it did teach me how to take responsibility for what I say. That line landed harder than I intended, but it was true, and she knew it. Madison looked away, blinking fast. For a moment, she seemed smaller, not in stature, but in certainty. Like the blow to her ego had loosened the structure she relied on to stay upright. We walked back toward the parking lot. She kept her eyes down, her heels slower now, less certain. On her way to the car, she paused. How do you deal with it? She asked quietly. Deal with what? People judging you. I thought about it, the years of proving myself, the quiet grind, the respect earned piece by piece, the days nobody from home asked how I was doing. You get used to it, I said, but only if you're willing to change the part that's holding you back. She didn't respond. She just opened her car door, slid inside, and gripped the steering wheel like she wasn't sure whether to drive home or drive somewhere she wouldn't have to face herself. The sky above the base hummed with engine noise as another aircraft lifted off, its shadow sweeping across the ground between us. Madison watched it, eyes narrowed, expression impossible to read. She didn't say goodbye before starting the engine. But she didn't need to. Her face had already said everything. As soon as I got back to the hangar that afternoon, the familiar noise wrapped around me like armor tools clinking, aircraft humming, radios chirping out coded updates. It grounded me in a way nothing from home ever had. But standing beside the workbench, still in my coveralls, I glanced at my phone out of habit. 3 missed calls. All from Madison. A 4th one buzzed through as I stared at the screen. I answered before it pushed into voicemail, not because I was eager, but because ignoring her never made things easier. She didn't bother with hello. They rejected me, she said, voice sharp enough to cut. And don't pretend you're surprised. I leaned my hip against the metal table, letting her words wash over me without sinking in. Madison, these hiring processes aren't guaranteed for anyone. Oh please, she snapped. I know how things work, you just didn't want to help me. That's not true. Yes, it is. Her voice rose. If you'd gone in there and told them I was qualified, if you'd vouched for me, if you weren't so obsessed with following stupid rules, maybe I'd have a job right now. I closed my eyes briefly, inhaling slow. The frustration in her voice wasn't new, but the desperation beneath it was. I told you, federal hiring doesn't work through recommendations, not even for people in uniform. You could have done something, she insisted. Anything. The accusation wasn't about the job, it never was. It was about the narrative she'd built our entire lives, that everything wrong in her world somehow traced back to me not being enough, or being too much, or being in her way. What exactly do you think I did? I asked calmly. You didn't support me, she said, voice trembling. You have this whole life now. This rank, this respect. And you looked at me like I was some idiot who didn't deserve to be here. I never said that. You didn't have to, she shot back. I saw the way you looked at me in the hangar, like you were embarrassed of me. The truth stung in a way I didn't want to admit. Not because she was right, but because she was wrong and still convinced she was the victim. I didn't look at you that way, I said. I was just judging me, she interrupted. Like everyone else. You think you're better than me. I pressed my tongue against the back of my teeth. There it was, that old script, worn and familiar. Madison had been reciting it since we were kids. That's not what this is about, I said quietly. Then what? Her voice cracked. Tell me why things keep falling apart for me, while everything magically works out for you. Nothing about my life is magic, I said, keeping my voice steady. I've worked for every inch of it. Well, lucky you, she fired back. The bitterness in her tone was thick enough to taste through the phone. I stepped outside, letting the cool wind from the water hit my face. The sky above Whidbey was streaked with clouds, a plane taxiing out toward the runway, sunlight glinting off its wings. This place had shaped me, demanded things from me, given things back. Madison didn't understand any of that. "Madison," I said, keeping my voice level, "you didn't lose the job because of me, no?" "Then whose fault is it?" she whispered. "Yours," I said gently, because someone needed to say it. There was silence, heavy, expanding, trembling. "You said things in that interview," I continued. "And those things mattered. You mean calling them kids? That's ridiculous. They overreacted. It wasn't one comment. Well, excuse me for not knowing every little military rule." Her voice sharpened. "You could have helped me prepare. You could have explained what not to say. You didn't ask. I shouldn't have to ask," she exploded. "You're my sister. You're supposed to help me." My grip tightened around the phone. The wind blew hair across my cheek, and the sound of the aircraft behind me became a rising hum. She didn't hear any of it. She only heard the story she'd always told herself. Her voice softened to something dangerously fragile. "You want to know the truth? I think you enjoyed watching me struggle." My chest tightened. "That's not true. You liked seeing me fail," she continued, breath shaking. "You liked seeing me not get what I wanted. You liked standing there while people called you Petty Officer Carter." I let her words hang in the air because rushing to deny them felt pointless. She wasn't asking for truth, she was asking for validation of her resentment. "I didn't enjoy anything about today," I said. "You did," she whispered. "You finally got to feel superior. Congratulations." I swallowed hard. "That's not what happened." She let out a shaky exhale. "Well, it doesn't matter. Mom and Dad think you weren't supportive either. They know you could have done more." There it was, the family triangle, the old dynamic, the predictable hierarchy that had defined my childhood. "Madison," I said gently, "I'm sorry things are hard for you right now, but I can't fix something that wasn't my mistake." "You could have fixed it," she insisted. "You just chose not to." Her voice started breaking again, not in sorrow this time, but in fury. "You chose your Navy life over your family," she said. "You chose a rank over me." The ache that pressed into my ribs wasn't sadness. It was recognition. She didn't want a job. She wanted control. The same control she'd always had. "I didn't choose rank over you," I said quietly. "I chose my own life. And look how that turned out," she said bitterly. "You have everything, and I have nothing." The line didn't disconnect. She didn't hang up. She just breathed into the phone, shallow and uneven, as if the words she'd spilled were too heavy to hold alone. Somewhere behind me, a P-8 engine began to roar, its vibration rolling across the tarmac, swallowing her accusations in sound I'd grown accustomed to. But even with the noise rising, her voice stayed sharp in my ears, clinging like a bruise that hadn't fully faded. No cliffhanger, no pause, no anticipation, just the weight of her blame settling between us, filling the space where understanding should have been. The hum of the hangar had barely settled into the background of my mind when my division lead called my name from across the workspace. His tone wasn't sharp, but it had an edge to it, one that made my stomach tighten before I even turned around. "Carter," he said, holding a sheet of paper. "Admin needs you in HR. Now." I wiped my hands on a rag and walked over. "Everything okay?" He handed me the paper, a printed copy of an email. "Take this with you." I scanned the first two lines, and the breath slid painfully out of my chest. It was from Madison, to the HR inbox at the base. Subject line, "Urgent, concerns about my sister's conduct during hiring process." My fingers tightened on the page, but I forced myself to keep reading. She claimed I'd interfered with her interview, that I'd discouraged her from applying, that I'd spoken negatively about her to staff, that I had influenced the panel through indirect pressure. And the last sentence, so neatly typed it almost looked innocent, cut the deepest. "I am worried my sister's behavior reflects poorly on Navy standards and professionalism." The words left a hollow feeling in my chest. For a moment, all I could do was stare at the page, heat building along the back of my neck. My lead watched me, expression careful. I don't know what happened with your sister, he said, but HR has to follow protocol. It's not personal. It's procedure. Protocol. Procedure. Words that normally steadied me. But right then, every syllable felt heavier. I headed toward HR, the clatter of the hangar fading behind me. The hallway felt too narrow, too bright. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, steady and humiliating. It amazed me how the same person who mocked every achievement I had could still find a way to wedge herself into the one life where I finally stood tall. The HR supervisor, Mr. Harlan, greeted me with a neutral nod. Petty Officer Carter, thank you for coming. He motioned toward a chair across from his desk. A second person, a uniformed officer from Base Legal, sat beside him, reading documents with the calm of someone accustomed to messy situations. I set the paper on the desk. Harlan tapped it lightly. We received this email last night. Per policy, we are required to notify your chain of command and conduct a preliminary review. I nodded, keeping my voice steady. I understand. Good, he said. Before we continue, do you want to provide context? I explained the situation in clear, factual terms. Madison's job search, her visit, her behavior, her disappointment, her anger. I didn't embellish anything, didn't soften it, didn't dramatize it, just the facts. I even added where I may have unintentionally added tension by being too blunt about the interview process. The legal officer took notes. His pen didn't pause once. When I finished, he leaned back and folded his hands. Thank you. Now we have something further to show you. Harlan slid another sheet forward. It was a screenshot from Madison's email thread messages she had CC'd to her personal address before sending the complaint. She had written, "My sister has always tried to control the narrative. I don't want someone like her representing the Navy." The words blurred for a second as I blinked. My throat felt tight enough to bruise. Not because of the accusation, but because she had thrown my career into an official channel without hesitation like she was tossing out an old sweater. The legal officer spoke calmly. Do you have proof contradicting her claims? I pulled my phone from my pocket and laid it flat on the table. I do. I have all her texts. I scrolled through, her asking for help, her blaming me, her saying the interviewers didn't deserve her experience, not a single mention of me influencing anything. I handed the phone over. The officer and Harlan both reviewed the thread quietly. After a moment, the officer nodded. This is sufficient. A weight I didn't know I'd been holding eased slightly, but not all the way. Harlan set the phone down. Petty Officer Carter, let me reassure you. This review is not a disciplinary action. It is procedural. Nothing in your record is being jeopardized. I exhaled slowly. I appreciate that, he continued, voice even. Additionally, it is clear from the HR side that your sister's statements were not based in fact. Her interview panel independently documented her inappropriate comments. A quiet beat followed. The officer added, "The email she sent, while unprofessional, will not affect you, but it will affect her. HR will designate her as not eligible for future federal positions on this installation, and that notation will carry to other federal hiring systems." The words landed with a dull thud. Madison had not just burned a bridge. She had doused it in gasoline and tossed a match behind her. I sat back, letting the truth settle. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. Something else took the place of anger, something quieter, harder to name, a mix between grief and inevitability. When the meeting wrapped up, Harlan gave me a small nod. You handled this well. Let your chain know you're cleared from concern. I walked out into the daylight. The wind off the sound brushed against my uniform, cool and grounding. Out on the flight line, a crew was prepping an aircraft for maintenance. My division chief spotted me, lifted a hand, and called, "All good?" "Yeah," I said. "All good." And it was because the truth was documented, the drama contained, the process completed. But the ache in my chest lingered. Not sharp, not fresh, but deep. Because even as the noise of the bass returned to its steady rhythm around me, one thought pressed against my ribs. My sister would rather risk my career than accept her own failure. The realization didn't feel like a cliffhanger. It didn't feel like a turning point. It simply settled into place another quiet truth in a life that had finally outgrown her shadow. Walking out of HR that day, I expected the tension in my chest to ease, but it lingered like a bruise touched too soon. I crossed the tarmac toward the hangar where my division was prepping for another systems check. The familiar mix of jet fuel and cold coastal wind settled around me, tightening then easing my muscles in a rhythm I knew well. This place operated on clarity procedures, checklists, accountability. The contrast to the emotional chaos my family lived in was almost startling. When I got back to the shop, Chief Morgan glanced at me over the rim of his coffee mug. "Everything squared away?" "Yeah," I said. "They cleared the complaint." He nodded once, a short, approving gesture. "Good. Would have surprised me if they didn't. You've got a clean record, solid work ethic, that carries weight." The words didn't inflate my ego. They steadied me. They reminded me that everything I had in this world, every bit of respect, had been built long before Madison tried rewriting the narrative. Later that evening, after the last maintenance run, I headed toward the barracks to change. A few sailors from my division were outside, laughing about a joke someone told during the brief. One of them looked up as I approached. "Hey, Carter," he said. "Congrats again." I paused. "For what?" He lifted his phone. "You didn't see? They posted the preliminary E6 eligibility list." Something in my chest stalled. I took his phone and scrolled, and there it was, my name. Carter. Natalie E. Eligible for E6 advancement review. It wasn't a promotion yet, but it meant my command had put my name forward. It meant they believed I was ready to take on more responsibility, more leadership, more weight. It meant every long shift, every certification, every late-night troubleshooting session had amounted to something real. I handed his phone back, a small breath escaping through my nose. "Thanks." That night, lying in my rack, the hum of the building around me felt different, steady, trustworthy, quiet in a way that didn't press down on me. I slept deeper than I had in days. The next morning, I woke to another string of messages on my phone. This time, they weren't from Madison. They were from my mom, then my dad, then relatives I barely spoke to. And finally, one from Madison herself. They had all seen the same thing. Someone from my division had shared our internal congratulatory video on Facebook, and Madison had apparently stumbled across it. The video was simple. A few clips of our team at work, a quick shot of the medal ceremony from months back, and the announcement of our department's candidates for advancement. The comments were full of coworkers cheering each other on, tagging names, congratulating me, and a few others. But it wasn't the video itself that held weight. It was the way my family reacted to it. My mom wrote, "Why didn't you tell us? We didn't know you were doing all this." My dad wrote, "Proud of you. Wish we'd understood sooner." My relatives wrote messages ranging from surprise to sentimental. But Madison's message, hers was different. "I didn't know you were that important." No apology. No acknowledgement of what she'd done. Just a sentence that revealed the truth she'd been avoiding for years. She hadn't just underestimated me. She had needed me to be small so she could stay tall. I stared at her text for a long, still moment. Every version of myself she had crafted in her shadow flickered across my mind. The quiet kid, the easy target, the one she felt comfortable mocking, the one our parents never defended, the one she assumed would never outrank her in life, or anything that mattered. But the uniform on my back, the nameplate, the insignia, the trust my command placed in me, none of it needed her recognition. I didn't feel the urge to respond. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I set the phone down and stepped outside. Dawn was creeping across the sky, pale pink light bleeding into the low clouds over the flight line. Sailors were already moving around the aircraft, prepping for the day. A petty officer from another division saluted as he passed. "Morning, Carter," he said. I nodded. "Morning." The ease of it, the rhythm, the belonging settled into me like warmth. I didn't need my family to see it. I lived it every day. Near midday, the command master chief stopped me outside the maintenance office. "Carter," he said, motioning to walk with him. I matched his pace. "I read the report from HR, he said. "You handled it professionally. No defensiveness, no dramatics. That matters. Thank you, Master Chief." He glanced at me, expression steady. "You've earned the reputation you have here. Don't let anyone take that from you." We reached the corner of the building. He stopped, then added, "Some families don't know how to treat a strong one until they finally see her stand straight." The words hit deeper than he knew. He clapped my shoulder once firm, approving, and headed back inside. I lingered, letting the breeze lift the flyaway hairs near my temples. For years, I had chased approval from people who had no idea who I was. Now, the people who did know, the ones who worked beside me, trusted me, respected me, were the ones whose voices actually mattered. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Madison. "Call me when you can." I didn't pick it up, not out of anger, not out of spite, but because my life had finally shifted into a place where her voice wasn't the center of it. As I walked back toward the hangar, aircraft prepping for flight and sailors calling out to each other around me, the truth settled in quietly, without fanfare. I had built a life she couldn't diminish, a future she couldn't rewrite, a rank she couldn't overshadow. And whether she ever understood it or not, I no longer needed her approval to stand tall in the uniform she once mocked. If this story resonated with you, if you've lived through your own family revenge stories, or felt the sting of sister betrayal, don't forget to subscribe. There are more military stories like this, more journeys of strength and justice, and I'd be glad to share every one of them with you.